Excellent. So we'll go ahead and get started here as folks continue to join us. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you may be in the world. My name is Sophia Arend, and I'm the Global Blockchain Business Council's Communications and Content Lead. Global Blockchain Business Council, also referred to as GBBC, is pleased to welcome you to this webinar in partnership with Global Digital Finance. This is our Global Leaders Series. So it's a weekly global town hall we host with policymakers and business leaders to hear their insights into their work, the state of blockchain and digital assets, and current global affairs. So today we're pleased to be joined by Jemma Green. She is co-founder and chairman of Power Ledger, and GBBC CEO and GDF board director Sandra Ro. They will be having a conversation on Jemma's journey to founding Power Ledger and how Power Ledger is working to chart a path towards a more sustainable energy future for us all. So just briefly before we begin, I'd like to introduce Jemma. She's in fact Dr. Jemma Green, and she is dedicated to creating a viable energy market for renewable energy that empowers consumers. This mission began with her PhD in electricity market disruption, the seed for the idea of Power Ledger, and her championing of sustainability and corporate social responsibility while working in finance for banks like JP Morgan. In 2018, Dr. Green won Sir Richard Branson's Extreme Tech Challenge Award, followed by the EY FinTech Entrepreneur of the Year Award. She currently lives in Perth. We're so pleased to have her here with us today, and we welcome your questions at any point during today's webinar. You can submit them in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll take them throughout. So without further ado, I'd like to hand things off to our host, Sandra Ro, to begin.
Thank you, Sophia, and delighted to have Jemma with us today. Thank you so much for accommodating. It's quite late your time in Perth, but really excited to dive in and get the latest on what's going on with you, Power Ledger. So let's get started. Jemma, please tell us for those in the audience who may not be as familiar with Power Ledger, we met a few years ago. It seems like a lifetime ago, but actually it was a concept you conceived, and it's now 4 years old, 5 years old?
5 years old this month, actually, yeah.
Excellent. Well, happy anniversary, Power Ledger. Could you unpack for the audience who may not be as familiar, how did Power Ledger start, and where are you today?
We started by accident, in short, and slightly longer answer is, in my PhD, I did some applied research and was setting up a microgrid and apartment building with solar and batteries. And I was trying to find software that would allow trading within the condos, where each condo would be given a portion of the output of the solar and the battery system. And if they didn't consume that, they could trade it with their neighbours. And I couldn't find anything that did that. And by chance, a former banking colleague of mine introduced me to my business partner, John Bullich, who had been working in the blockchain field for a number of years. This was at the beginning of 2016. And we looked further into the electricity sector and saw there were a number of projects using the blockchain to create marketplaces for trading of energy and commodities related to energy. So things like renewable energy certificates. And thought, this could do what I had hoped in my doctoral research, but also there could be broader applications for trading across the grids, energy grids as well. And so we just decided to set up the company, and we did some testing at a retirement village south of Perth. And then we got some news coverage on that, and pretty soon we were doing a project in New Zealand and Thailand. And now we have more than 20 projects 20 clients in 9 countries, ranging from virtual power plant trading to peer-to-peer trading to allowing customers to choose their own energy mix. So there's quite a diverse landscape of use cases using our platform and its features, but broadly speaking, it allows more like electricity retailers to offer their customers more choice and empowerment.
So the benefits to the consumer, I think are fairly easy to understand. You get more options, you get choice, and frankly, lower prices. If you think about some of the challenges you've seen or some of the evolution you've seen over the last few years, what's actually struck you the most sort of as, a friction or challenge that you guys have had to overcome at Power Ledger?
Well, I think when you're doing anything new, there's a lot of people that either don't think that anything else could happen other than what is.
Yeah.
And then also comprehension. Like electricity is quite a complex topic. It's not like, it's not like cocoa beans. You can't just, store it in a warehouse. And I think the blockchain is a complex topic as well. So you've got two quite complex subjects that people have to wrap their heads around. And also, I think on top of that, you've got the mania that happened, around blockchain and skepticism, which was justified in many cases. So you're kind of contending with a lot of things to get people to understand. And if people don't understand something, they generally don't trust it. So I think that like establishing an understanding in the market and getting people to look at their problems through the lens of this technology to see how it could solve problems and add value, but also not just how it can solve problems, but also create new markets and do things that haven't been done before. And I think that's really where we've seen an inflection point in electricity markets in the past 12 months, I would say, because of the much higher penetration of renewables and the problems that are being caused in electricity grids from renewables. So when you get a lot of renewable energy when there's not enough demand at that time in that place, the grid breaks. So you get problems with voltage and reactive power, and we're starting to see these issues really manifest. So renewables are being blamed correctly, but really it's the way the renewables have been grown until now, which was largely driven by subsidies. And our thesis is that if you actually put correct price signals in, supported by a marketplace like ours, then you can grow renewables in a scalable way, i.e. put renewables in the grid when and where they are needed, and avoid this kind of phenomena that some people would call the duck curve, which is basically too much electricity when there's not demand. And in places like California and in Germany and in Australia and Japan, where there's high penetration of renewables, this has become a very prevalent issue. So I think that has kind of come to a head, if you like. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, the regulatory landscape has changed. It was foreshadowed that this would happen, but the rollout of that is really starting to take effect. So in the US, there's a FERC ruling called 2222, which got announced in September 2020, which means that households and everyday people will be able to trade directly in the wholesale electricity market soon, in the next sort of year or so. And that will need software to do that. And rules in Europe across the EU called the Clean Energy Package, which is requiring all the EU member states to implement local energy sharing laws by the end of 2021 is also like a cornerstone piece. Similar to, I think overall, I would say it's similar to what happened in 1996 with Bill Clinton's Telecommunication Deregulation Act, which really sort of set the stage for, packets of data being traded in ways that hadn't been contemplated before, and lots of new market participants getting involved in the telecommunication sector and setting up internet service providers. And there was a lot of small companies that grew a customer base and consolidation and M&A that happened. And I think that we're in that formation stage similarly to what happened there. So I think to answer your question in short, that I think there's a lot of things that have to be contended with to develop anything new. And when they're particularly complex, even more so. And the electricity markets in different countries are all different. So it's not a one size fits all solution either.
So as a follow-up to that, if I may ask, you mentioned a couple regulations that have come out that should be favorable for both the consumer and anyone innovating. What regions would you say are you particularly bullish about? Is it EU and US or other?
I think there are a number of places, and so you've got kind of the laws, and then you've got the regulation and rules that sit underneath it, and a lot of the detail around that is being worked out. Okay. But there's some surprises, I would say. So in India, in the state of Uttar Pradesh, which has 90 million people living in it, it's the largest and most populous region in India, they just changed their rules and said, we'd like to allow peer-to-peer trading facilitated by blockchain. And they did that pretty much with the stroke of a pen, because the government has big ambitions around renewables, and they're hitting a lot of the targets for large-scale renewables, but not for small-scale distributed. And they see peer-to-peer as a way to encourage the growth of renewables in Uttar Pradesh.
Right.
And then another state in India similarly changed its rules, Karnataka, and they have just 64 million people living there. And you can see the size of these markets is, enormous. And in some ways, I think some of the developing countries may leapfrog ahead in a surprising and unexpected fashion compared to places like Europe, where that rule that I mentioned, the Clean Energy for All package, that directive came out in 2018 with a requirement for the member states to implement by 2021. And so there was a long lead up to the 2018 directive. So you saw it coming, whereas India just sort of looked at it and very soon, months later, changed the rules. So I guess what I'm saying, it's a bit hard to predict precisely, but you can see broadly the countries that have set targets around renewables,
right,
and hit some of those milestones and now want to get to the next frontier, but don't necessarily want to fund it with subsidy. I think that they are prime candidates, and also the ones that are struggling because they've got high penetration of renewables. So Texas, for example, I think is a really interesting location because it has run itself very leanly and separate to the FERC rules nationally in the US. But because of the blackouts, many of the utilities have lost vast sums of money. And so now they're looking at new ways to have flexible loads that they can pay their customers for and create these two-sided markets. And where it was like, yeah, this is something that we might explore for the future, now it's like, we must do this immediately because we cannot lose $100 million again. So these situations are almost catalyzing things that were ripe for change. I guess in a similar way to what COVID has done in, fast forwarding remote learning. And I think that concerns around electricity grid stability and high costs and carbon emissions are kind of propelling certain places forward faster than others in sometimes expected and sometimes surprising ways.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought up Texas because if anything, not only did the utilities there lose an awesome amount of money, but real lives were lost due to the fact that people couldn't get heat. And it's a travesty to see that in a place like the US where people expect to, have service fairly quickly. And some people were out for a week or more without any sort of heat or electricity. It was actually people lost lives.
Yeah, and I think the most vulnerable people are the ones that can least afford the very high bills that came with those kinds of prices that were seen in the Texas market. So the liberalization of that market, like the prices were very low while everything is fine. But if you have a tail event, then with the lack of regulation in that market, I think, or the lack of parameters for deal with the resiliency issues, then the consumer bore the brunt of that. And yeah, I think there's growing recognition that is unacceptable, and that something has to be done to ensure that in an event like that happening again, the same impact won't be felt like in the electricity system and for the citizens.
Absolutely. And, going back to India, you've got actually an audience question here about New Delhi. Do you have a project in New Delhi? Is that correct?
Yes. We are working with Tata Power, doing a customer-facing peer-to-peer trial. They're signing up customers right now. It's very exciting because they're looking at, Tata has actually been like a real innovator of a company since its inception. Even though it's an Indian brand, it's really like got global recognition, and they're trying to understand like what is a customer-facing product for the future for them. In India, you can't actually sign up to get a renewable energy tariff. It doesn't exist right now. And so they're looking at how can they engage the customers and start to grow renewables and contribute towards the national targets as well. So we're really excited to be working with them in New Delhi on the peer-to-peer project, and there's information on the Power Ledger website about that as well.
Well, EK, as the moniker showed, you can go check out Power Ledger's website for any data and updates. That's great. I wanted to actually talk a little bit about some of the other projects you've got going on. I mean, you have projects all over the world at this point, but some of your earliest projects, like the ones in Thailand and particularly in Australia, how do you see the evolution with respect to each markets are unique? They have their own standards, they have their own regulation. Do you think that remains? Do you want to see more globalized standards and metrics, or do you feel like you can still operate and innovate in a world where every country's got its own sort of set of rules and you've got to kind of navigate that?
I think as you start to look at new energy markets with like digital platforms, APIs are, the way that these systems talk to each other, and like smart meters and the metering standards and the data around that. I mean, I think that I don't think we need to standardize the electricity markets personally. I don't, we're not thinking, if only they're all the same, our business would be easier. I don't think that is important to us. And I think there is so much going on that in energy that is context specific.
Right.
So I think that you really do have to have something that is fit for purpose. So I think it does need to be bespoke. That said, there are many things about electricity markets which are inefficient, that have legacy things in them that for which there's inertia. I mean, metaphorically speaking, to change things, and you can see that with any new innovation that is disrupting legacy technologies, where there is a resistance to that. And I think it's most visibly seen in Australia, interestingly, with the change of so many prime ministers over energy policy here. We've had like 5 or 6 prime ministers with different positions on that topic, but I think that the polarization of the conversation around energy is something that is quite unhelpful. And, on the one hand, you have like climate activists that are saying, things like, the planet is burning and it really doesn't matter what the price of electricity is. We have to, get to 100% renewables immediately. And even if we have blackouts and the cost of energy triples, so be it. And then on the other end of that polarized spectrum, you have people that go, well, actually, I don't believe in climate change, or I really don't want blackouts, and I can't afford 300% more electricity because I'm a pensioner, or actually my business won't survive if I have to pay that much because electricity is a big input cost.
Sure.
And I think that they are, very valid concerns. So what our view is, and my view, Power Ledger's view and my view, is that we see our technology as a bit of a missing piece of the jigsaw puzzle to help drive renewables, but without the issues that can be caused by renewables in the grid.
Yep.
Typically where they're basically grown by subsidy, which is a very blunt price signal to put energy anywhere at any time. And it's okay if it's just 1 or 2% in the system, but once you start to get to 10 or 20%, that's where you start to get the issues that places like California are experiencing, and Germany as well, because they have the highest penetration of renewables in the world, but the highest cost of electricity in the world. And like McKinsey put a report out on Germany and said that they're actually failing across all 3 metrics of stability, carbon emissions, and cost. Because of the way in which they've gone about growing renewables. So our thesis is that if you actually put price signals for where energy is needed, when it's needed, using technology like the blockchain that can do complex things at scale efficiently, then a lot of the value for households and businesses that will be transacting in this environment can be preserved for them, those who've invested in assets. And we think that's really important, because that will build confidence in the market and actually start to deal with deal with the issues more efficiently than they have been until now. So it doesn't really make sense to, you know, build a lot of generation in the north of a country when the demand is in the south, only to have to build very big transmission lines, which everyone has to pay for. It's better to build distributed generation in the south, where for it to generate electricity where it's needed. But for that to happen, you need clear price signals, strong price signals, and local and discrete price signals. So I think the differences in energy, I think, make it more interesting to work in. But I think that the places that have got to high penetration of renewables first have the most issues to contend with. So in Australia, South Australia has had a lot of issues. Germany and California, I think they're kind of the poster children.
Okay.
But interestingly, I think because they're having to grapple with these issues, they will become the blueprint for, like, the basket cases, if you like, the harder places to deal with this will become the reference standards for how they navigated it
Right.
through through these issues. Texas will probably become, the exemplar as a result of never wanting what happened to Texas to happen again.
Yeah, no, being a leader or the first out the gate in any category often comes with lots of pains and challenges. So if they work it out, then you're right, they'll be the leaders to emulate in that space.
Yeah.
When you think about, and there's a few questions here on residential solar, companies offer power purchase agreements for residential solar. Is it something you see changing? How do you see the solar space, if you can comment at all?
Well, I mean, looking at the incumbent players and their, and the potential for their market share or their profit margins to be eroded, they can either fight that and resist the change and try and encourage taxes on renewables or, increase grid charges for renewables, or they can start to innovate and try and participate in the market. And PPAs are a way that electricity retailers are starting to sell their customers renewables, but over a 10-year period, where the output of a solar system or a battery system is supplied to the house under a feed-in tariff type, or a micro PPA, I would call it. And I think that is a way that electricity retailers can get new customers and also keep them as well. Because if you've signed on to a 10-year contract, you're with that retailer for that period of time. Whereas if you weren't, you might move retailers every couple of years, depending on the offer. So I think retailers are cottoning on to the fact that that's a market opportunity for them. And we've actually done a project in Australia called Loyalty Peer-to-Peer Trading with a beer manufacturer called VB. And they're one of the oldest beer manufacturers here. And they made a commitment in 2018 to go 100% renewables by 2025. And part of the way that they're looking to do that is to buy rooftop solar from households using our platform and pay them in beer delivered to their house.
Wow.
And it's effectively a micro PPA. So instead of the brewery just buying it from a solar farm via a PPA, they're buying it from, in a distributed sense, from lots of small solar systems from households, and paying them in product. And I think we're really excited about this peer-to-peer platform feature, because many companies have made public commitments around their intention to procure renewable energy, and particularly those consumer brands, consumer goods and services, so food and beverages, supermarkets, hotels, telecommunications. Many of those can now use solar as a form of currency and buy the energy from their customers, engage with their customers in a new way, and pay them in store product or vouchers. So I think we started off with beer, but in the future it could be other goods and services, and we've already got a lot of interest from other companies that want to do the same. So I think we're moving from a centralized paradigm of large-scale PPAs to a distributed paradigm of decentralized PPAs.
Yeah, which actually reminds me, there have been a lot of recent announcements, whether it's in the US, New York City, New York State has made announcements about, and many companies have made announcements how they're going carbon neutral by X date, right? But that also includes then massive efforts to get to that place in such a short period of time. And there's still laws, and there's a question here about the fact that there's still laws on the books that don't allow for P2P trading, or for consumers to get involved in helping, right? So in many ways, there's a policy piece, and then there's obviously the technical piece, which Power Ledger has largely solved for. How do you work or engage with the policy side? Do you tend to, as Power Ledger, go into areas where the laws have already changed? Or are you also working in areas where you're having discussions as legislation's kind of and policies kind of catching up?
Yeah, there's a few bits to that question. So let me try and unpack it. In terms of the US, the FERC 2222 rule change, basically every state in the US except Texas, which is not part of the federal energy regulation, will be allowing everyday households and businesses to trade directly in the wholesale electricity market. So that is going to open up the potential for trading peer-to-peer and virtual power plants and things like that. So I think that is happening, the changing in the US context. In other places, you mentioned the Thailand project, the T77 project in Bangkok, that is it's about 700 kilowatts across 6 commercial buildings. That's actually growing by another like half a megawatt with the 077 precinct being onboarded right now. But that project was really important in Asia to get people to understand what a project might look like in their region. And I mentioned that, your question at the beginning is, how is it, doing this innovation? And it's hard if people haven't seen it or experienced it. It's hard for them to imagine. So even like if it's in their region, it's more valuable to their understanding and conception of what they might do. So I think that project was really important to the projects that emerged in India that I mentioned in Uttar Pradesh and with Tata Power, and also the project that we did in Malaysia. And I think that the thinking around it, so I would say that these trials have opened up the conversations for what places like Uttar Pradesh might do and actually catalyze the rule changes that I mentioned before.
Right.
So I wouldn't say all of our projects are leading to the regulatory change around the world. I think there's a general trend, but I think that these demonstration projects are really an important piece in actually people understanding how they might productize something for their market with this kind of technology.
Absolutely. I think we underestimate sometimes how much people need to see something or see it working, even in small scale, to really kind of get it.
Yes.
If conceptually it sounds right.
Yes.
Appreciate that very much. So when you think about Power Ledger's mission over the next year or so, and the way you see the projects that you're working on rolling out, but also new projects that you're looking at, what are some of the criteria that you look for? I mean, what are your goals for 2021 and beyond?
Well, in the places where we've done projects, it's really about driving scale and really getting more users to the platform. So in the US, we have a project for renewable energy certificate trading, which one renewable energy certificate, or a REC, represents 1 megawatt hour of renewable power having been generated. And companies can buy RECs to cover the volume of energy that they consume to be able to validly claim, we use 100% renewables. And companies like Google and some of the other corporate leaders are now starting to match their REC buying against their low profile. So if they consume energy at 4 p.m. in New York on a Tuesday, they want a REC that was generated at 4 p.m. in New York on a Tuesday.
Yeah.
But to do that, you need that information in the REC, and it hasn't existed. But we've partnered with MREX, which is the Midwest Renewable Energy Tracking Scheme in the US, which is the largest REC registry for voluntary RECs. to put the hourly data in the RECs and connect to our platform by API to allow them to be traded and settled. And we're just finalising the technical integration on that front. And so we're effectively creating a tokenized version of the REC, like a non-fungible token, on our platform. And once that trades between the buyer and the seller, we send a message to the registry to move the REC from the seller's wallet to the buyer's wallet. And I think that is like an abstraction of energy. Renewable energy certificate is that, but that is something that you can trade cross borders. So a company in Singapore, where there's not much renewables, can buy a certificate from someone in Thailand and settle, on a blockchain and not have to deal with complex and lengthy procurement and legal and contracts, and actually deal with a lot of the counterparty settlement questions that would happen under a traditional way of transacting. So for us, this next year is about taking the proof point of like TraceX, that REC trading in the US, and scaling it and also rolling it out in other regions. Similarly, the Loyalty peer-to-peer trading with beer, we will intend to bring other consumer brands onto the platform to be able to do peer-to-peer trading with their customers. And for the virtual power plant, which is basically batteries dispatching electricity into the grid so that people that have bought batteries can pay back their investment faster. Our first project is in South Australia, but we intend to roll that out into other parts of Australia and internationally. And then we've hired people in Berlin and Japan and London, and in the US now we're starting to provide in-market representation, and that's a function of the market maturing, which is really exciting to see. But also because of COVID, like we were able to sign quite a lot of contracts in spite of not meeting our clients in person. But sometimes they were like, oh, actually, we're going to choose somebody who's like down the road or in our market. And so we realized that was something that was important as well to grow the company and the platform and achieve our mission around impacting the lives of 1 billion people. So, and I'd say the other piece is around partnership for inorganic growth. So we're looking at partnership opportunities where other companies' sales channels can be used to sell our platform and achieve scale in markets that we're not in or faster.
Well, actually, that leads to Dugu's question. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Are you cooperating with energy cooperatives in any country? And if you are, in what way in terms of partnership?
So we are talking to a number of like municipal energy businesses in the US. That it's quite a common model, and they're actually very innovative. So there's a lot of interest there around virtual power plants and how to automate the process for issuance of certificates, so energy certificates. So yes, we are. And then in Europe, the rule change that I mentioned has two parts to it: energy trading, but also energy communities, which means that anyone could set up and become a retailer. So you could have a community group or a local government or a group of schools could set up and become a retailer and supply all of the households, the student households. So I think that type of way of distributing energy is going to actually grow in interest. I think it used to be how energy was handled before national grids emerged, but I think now, in spite of grids being national and cross country, we're looking at how do we manage the energy systems more locally.
Yeah, excellent point. Going from national to more localized, smaller systems. And maybe this dovetails in, you'll tell me, with Tristan's question here about, obviously you've mentioned several times about the increased renewable energy supply, and then you end up with all this dislocation and disruption. He's asking about developments in large scale battery usage. Obviously, Power Ledger solving for smoothing out by trading, and better ways of dealing with that sort of oversupply and meeting the demand. But what about on the battery side? Do you see any developments of large scale battery, development?
I think that large scale batteries will be a very big part of the story. They're not going to be everything. I think small scale batteries are going to be significant, and that's household batteries, electric vehicles, and I think medium-sized batteries in like shopping centres and malls and things like that are going to be important as well.
Mhm.
But Václav Smil wrote a report with JP Morgan called Stargazing, and he said that he made his 10 commandments of energy, and one of the things he said was, thou shalt not overestimate the impact that storage will have, because at the moment, for example, in the US, there's only 1% of energy is stored. It's very small. So a lot would need to happen for it to like really become double digits or even, very meaningful. But I think that storage is going to be an important piece of the puzzle, and it might not just be big batteries. It could be hydropower, pumped hydro storage, biogas, and hydrogen. The hydrogen story, I think, is just emerging now, and there's a lot that needs to be retooled for green hydrogen to compete with hydrogen derived from fossil fuels. But as the price of electricity comes down, even from renewables even more, and the demand for that becomes more of a priority, I think that hydrogen is going to become a green hydrogen, and the certification of hydrogen and the provenance of that hydrogen is going to be very important, and you're going to need to track it. So I think that blockchain technology is going to be really important for the hydrogen story. So hydrogen derived from renewables, to be able to validate that. So I know it's actually been where it's come from, and I can track each step in the supply chain of its origins. I think that's going to be very important as well. And we're actually working on a project in that regard in North America. So I think we'll start to see a lot more happening in the green hydrogen space, and the blockchain linked to it as well.
Watch out for that. I want to go back to the example that you gave around REX and tokenization of REX as unique, non-fungible tokenization effectively, which, NFTs have gotten a lot of limelight because of, the artist community. And I think that's really great. I think what most people have not realized is obviously the benefits of tokenization to the energy markets and what that can look like. And you just gave us a great example of what that could do, trading across borders, provenance verified, have confidence in the fact that you're actually trading something that has, validation and, frankly, it's been confirmed and therefore secure to trade. So when you look at tokenization, can you talk a little bit about, you have power tokens, you've gone on a tokenization journey as a company, but also you're seeing tokenization being utilized in different ways in the energy space. So really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking that question. So in terms of Power Ledger and our platform, we have a token that we created called the Power Token, POWR, and that is actually what our clients can pay for their software license in. So they can pay for accessing our platform with the Power Token. They can also pay in cash. But if they pay in cash, like a typical software license, they pay and they never get it back. And if they pay in the Power Token, what we do is we escrow that power while they're using the platform. And if they stop using the platform, they can receive the power back. And so they're relatively more incentivized to pay in power than they are in cash, because they can benefit from the utilization of the Power Ledger network. And we created 1 billion units of power in 2017, and there's about half of them in circulation and half of them sit in the Power Ledger treasury. And we, with our projects, have been validating the different use cases for the Power Token and like doing product market fit for power and the use of it as a licensing fee, but also how it can be utilized for our blockchain as well. So the Power Token is an ERC20 token on the Ethereum blockchain, but we also have a proprietary in-house blockchain for the trading of electricity. And we have a cryptographic token for recording the units of energy that are traded called Sparks. And that's just sits in the background like an account record keeping system.
Okay.
But we're also developing a new version of that blockchain, and we'll be launching details of that like in a few weeks actually. So we're really excited about it.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And we'll be publishing a report on that with the Global Blockchain Business Council very shortly. But I think suffice to say, what we've been doing over the past 5 years is understanding exactly all the different use cases for energy, blockchain, environmental commodity trading using blockchain, and have designed the blockchain that we think is very fit for purpose. So, it has super fast block time for writing lots of small transactions at scale. And I think that's a very important feature, but there's many other kind of attributes for which we've made it very fit for purpose. So yeah, I think the Power Token, I think we issued it to the market in 2017 at around 8 cents. And I actually haven't looked for a while, but I think it's trading around 40 cents. So, and there were a lot of companies that issued energy tokens and other tokens in that era. And there's only really a couple now in the energy space that are making meaningful progress. And I think that the space is enormous. So, I mean, some people would think, you don't really like your competitors existing, but ironically, we don't feel that way because it's, as I said, it's really complex. And I think I think there's a bit of alignment around the why people are doing this. We're trying to actually solve some of the most wicked problems and, make a meaningful contribution to the energy system. So I think it's great that there are other innovators in our space that are doing great things in the energy sector.
Absolutely. And Jemma, you underscore the point. The problems that you and others in the space are solving for are enormous global challenges, and frankly can't be done by one small group of people alone. It really does need to be a collaboration all over the world. But going back to the RECs, someone did ask one question.
Yeah.
Did you see that? Do we need to standardize the way we define RECs globally so that there's no double spend or RECs that aren't really RECs? And I've heard that too in other categories of things that are not really carbon credits or things that are not really what they say they are.
Yeah, I mean, there have been examples of like companies that have issued like 30% more shares than actually existed.
Yeah.
I think this happened with Dole, the pineapple company, because of the way they were maintaining their share registry. And these things can happen just by accident. Like there's not necessarily any kind of like malicious intent. But in the case of renewable energy certificates and carbon credits, like there are concerns around double counting,
Right.
where if it's on a paper certificate, conceivably two people could possess that and think that they both own that. Whereas on a blockchain, that's actually impossible. Equally, a certificate could have been retired, but that if it's on a paper certificate, it could be sold when it doesn't exist anymore because it's been retired. Whereas on a blockchain, that is also not possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, more could be issued than actually is possible. So like a 100 megawatt solar farm could only create a certain amount of RECs, but if it on a blockchain, you could easily validate that in terms of any hourly interval, how many were issued and whether they've been retired and who owns them. Whereas paper certificates, again, you don't have that. So it could be there more that are issued than is possible. So you've got things that are retired, double counting of a REC, and also more than actually could be possibly in existence. So the number of these issues. And then the other piece is that there's non-standard ways for them to be traded. So a lot of time is spent negotiating the contracts around carbon credits and renewable energy certificates. And we see like a standardized contract is a really important piece in actually expediting the trading process. But in terms of renewable energy certificates, if you don't trust the certificate that you've bought, if you don't believe that it's real, you're not going to pay very much money for it. So trust and confidence in it is vital to it having value and maintaining its value. And I think that's, we talk about the blockchain and trust, but it's really important in energy particularly, because companies make claims about their renewableness, their greenness, based on that buying these products. And if they're then seen to be a sham or not authentic, that can really affect a company's credibility and its license to operate. And we've seen lots, what happens with scandals where things are not as they seem, and that can really impact the future and trajectory of a company. And sustainability leadership is seen as really important part of the brand for companies. So I think that having certificates that can be relied upon is really important. Actually, I think I saw Disney and JP Morgan last week in the news bought certificates that didn't exist. So, it's not like an abstract idea. This is something that is a real live issue that is affecting the industry. And I think that as we move from paper-based systems into not just digital, but systems that could be underpinned by technology like the blockchain, I think that's going to be really important to build confidence in those markets and have people go, oh, will I buy a carbon credit? I don't even know if it really happens, so I won't bother, versus, oh no, I know that really happens. I will purchase that because, I know that that is a valid thing. Yeah. So, and then the other thing I'd say is on the blockchain piece, we get asked about like all the time, like, can you do it without a blockchain? Why can't we just do it with a database? And I actually really like this question, even though we get asked it a lot. Yeah. But I feel like, we published a report with the Global Blockchain Business Council, like profiling this, but there was a time where, companies just put the word blockchain in their name and their stock price went up like 300% or more. And there was a lot of mania associated with that. And blockchain is kind of put at the front of the conversation, but I think it almost needs to be put in its rightful place. It's like barcodes in a supermarket. Like, would you go to the supermarket because I'm going to this supermarket because they've got barcodes. Right. Like you wouldn't do that. But you go to that supermarket because there's a certain experience that happens, which is there's stock there because they've got good stock control because of the barcodes. And when you go to pay, it's more seamless and efficient. Yeah. So it changes the experience. It's not like you can still go to your local corner store where they maybe don't have barcodes, but it makes things more efficient, but it sits in the background. Yeah. And I think that is like a good way of describing it in the case of electricity markets. It's more reliable, you can trust it, and that's really important for doing more complex things where people are buying like a certificate to be able to make a claim about renewableness. You want to know you can trust that. And as the market, like FERC rule gets rolled out and these more complex trades happen where batteries and citizens will be trading with the market and each other, you want to be able to trust that record keeping system, and you don't want to have to pay a lot for the record keeping system. And I think with very complex things at scale, I think the blockchain can be very efficient as a technology. And so I think that those are, and the work that the Global Blockchain Business Council, I think, is really important in like putting blockchain in its rightful place, I would say.
Yes, let's solve real problems. And if it happens where a blockchain system is useful, and in some cases there are, then absolutely, let's advocate for that. But otherwise, you're absolutely correct. We need to solve for real problems. You've got a couple more questions, if it's okay. Would you mind taking them, Jemma? We'll take another minute or two before we wrap up.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. There is a follow-up question related to smart meters. And we didn't talk a lot about IoT, but actually smart devices are actually integral to a lot of the work that you're doing. How do you see smart contracts? And this is from Tristan, integrate smart meters with automatically creating certificates as NFTs? Do you see that one day? Maybe that could be something that like the device issues because it's been programmed to do so?
Yeah, I mean, I think in this new conception of a grid, I think devices are no longer dumb, and they have several attributes and enough intelligence to make some of their own decisions. So they will have a device identifier, they'll have a geolocation, they'll have a blockchain ID, then they'll have a bid and offer based on the need state. And then on top of this layer is the market, that allows for rapid real-time transactions between ordinary household devices. And I think there'll be an optimization piece around that as well. So you'll have AI and machine learning, which is going to optimize for certain outcomes and then co-optimize. So I think that the devices are going to become market participants as well as the citizens.
Yeah, and I'm going to underscore what you've already said, which I think the concept of NFTs have just started scratching the surface around tokenized non-fungible assets in not only energy markets, commodities markets, but financial services. There's a lot more to go.
Yeah, I mean, it's seen daylight in the mainstream because of art and people understanding, like holograms is how I used to do that, but now I can, like, if I'm an artist, I can create and sell these things and monetize income streams, to the extent things are repurposed and reused. So, but I think that there's so many more applications, as you say, and energy markets, commodities, and financial services are like really key areas where I think we're going to see a lot more happening in the non-fungible token space.
Absolutely. And then we're going to take one more final question from the audience, and then I'll let you wrap up after that. Johnny's asking about the FERC order you've mentioned. How do you think it affects the wholesale markets? Because we've talked about sort of at the consumer level, wow, you might actually be able to do P2P trading, which is kind of cool because I'd like to do that in New York City. Can't wait for that to come. But how do you see the wholesale markets being impacted?
Well, if there is more supply, then that should actually drive down prices. So if there are micro price signals and discrete price signals and the ability for smaller players to participate in the wholesale market, I think that's going to offer a whole lot more supply, which should actually create a more efficient market, I would say, overall. And if households and businesses are able to participate in the peak bits of the market, I think that's going to put the price signal for them to invest in an electric vehicle that could play in the market or a household battery. And so that price signal for the peak opportunities is going to be really important to encourage the investment in distributed energy resources, so solar systems and battery systems and EVs.
So implications beyond just, consumers trading and being able to have a direct ability to participate in how energy is used and bought and sold. For our last question, I want to turn it slightly to a different context. A lot of entrepreneurs around the world have obviously gone through 2020. You are a entrepreneur yourself. What advice do you have for those who are innovating in spaces as challenging as yours, where it's highly regulated, there's a lot of different red tape, you're trying to move the dial in, an industry that's frankly very entrenched in specific ways of doing things. What advice do you have for those who are entrepreneurs, young and old, innovating?
Well, pick a topic that you're particularly curious about, passionate about, and excited about, because being an entrepreneur is a lot of work, and you want to have a topic that makes your heart sing, because you're going to have to work very hard. I would say that's one. The second thing is that things don't happen in the way that you would predict a lot of the time. But as an entrepreneur, what you're really doing is you're making a lot of decisions every day, and some of them work and some of them don't. But as long as overall you're making more good ones than bad ones, then you're going to grow. And so you think it's just about like making perfect decisions, but actually it's about making good and bad ones, but calibrating that information. So in our case, we're thinking about how do we refine our strategy with that feedback loop, and how do we target the places where we think the market's going to, move the fastest first. That's the other thing. I think you have to have a mindset of that. I mean, it sounds cliched, but that fail fast and be, and accept that that's part of it. And the other thing is there's a graph that I refer to quite a bit, which is called like Life in the Day of an Entrepreneur. I don't know if you've seen it.
No.
It's very funny, but it basically is a graph that goes zigzag, zigzag like this. And it goes, it's awesome, it's terrible, it's great, it's terrible. And I think that's characteristic. Like, it's a very intense experience. It builds a lot of resilience. But I think that if you recognize that that is what it is like dealing with uncertainty and also maintaining your belief in what you're doing in spite of what anyone else might say.
Yeah.
And you don't want to drink Kool-Aid and be like delusional, but you also want to go, well, I actually have an insight because I'm spending a lot of my time on this. So I know something about this topic, and really backing yourself. So I think that that is something that you're going to need to do. If you like will lose your motivation because some people gave you a different opinion to what you're working on, then I think you're not going to stay an entrepreneur for very long. So I think you've got to have some pretty well-formed beliefs in what you're doing and also beliefs in yourself.
Yep, absolutely. Words of wisdom. And thank you so much for joining us so late in the evening. You've got a lot of thank yous here from folks who are very appreciative of your time. There's a question here that we're going to send to you privately, Jemma, that hopefully Gian, she will be able to answer, or the Power Ledger team will be able to answer. But thank you all so much for joining us. By the way, one last one. Is Power Ledger hiring? Can people go to the website to see if their job?
We are hiring. We are. We're currently looking for product owners and developers and blockchain developers. I'm on LinkedIn. Get in touch. Would love to chat.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Jemma. And we're going to hand back over to Sophia.
Thanks so much, Sandra and Jemma, for an excellent conversation, and to all of you who joined for your insightful questions. The GBBC and GDF host this webinar weekly, so you can join us next Tuesday at the same time for a conversation with Sherry Madera, Chief Industry and Government Affairs Officer at the London Stock Exchange Group. And for everyone who dialed in, we'll share a recording of this webinar and links to learn more about Power Ledger, including the reports mentioned and their job openings. So thank you so much, Jemma, for joining us, and thank you, Sandra. Till soon.
Have a good one. Bye, guys.